I'm David Brief.
My name is Hazel. I'm Yona's mom.
Yona is the youngest of all six.
Yona was a typical last child.
He was like the glue between his friends, within the family, within his unit.
And that's kind of Yona. He had that personality, that smile, that gentleness, very beloved amongst his friends.
Worked very hard to be accepted into the special unit called Duf Divan, and there he was selected to be not only a fighter, but also a medic for the unit. And what they did many times was they did many arrests of people that they knew were about to do some kind of terrorist act. In one of those operations, Yona was injured outside of Tulkarm when a pipe bomb was thrown down the alley he was running in. They screamed to him. He started running away from the pipe bomb that was rolling down the alley and exploded about 2 or 3 meters away from him, and he had a bad injury.
So Yona actually was known as a medical discharge, so he didn't have to go back because of his injury, and he had already served about 2.5 out of his 3 years of mandatory military service.
He debated whether he should go back or not.
And Yona, I think, came to the conclusion after a lot of talks with us that we don't quit and we keep going and finishing off what he was supposed to do.
And he decided that it was important to finish his service. First Shabbat that he was on the high alert was Simchat Torah. And he was there. He had a very nice time on Simchat Torah with his friends. And then in the morning, they got word that things were going on in the Otef Aza, and they went into Far Aza, not knowing exactly what they were going into. And they started going in house to house, freeing residents and eliminating as many terrorists as they could. What they didn't know was that between in the third and the fourth house that they went to, the terrorists had prepared a ambush. Yona saw, in front of him, one of his very good friends killed. And, their blood was running high. They knew that this is what they were there to do. And then he saw his Mempeh, his commanding officer, also shot. Yona ran out to try and save them. He reached his commanding officer, started dragging him, and that's when they shot him with, we think, 13 bullets. He told us he felt the bullets come into him, and every bullet was like the injury that he had outside of Tulkarm. Just terrible pain. He didn't think he was going to survive. He managed to crawl by himself with shooting going on into the house and started putting the tourniquets on himself, and was also telling other soldiers what they needed to do, how to take care of themselves. He was the first soldier to reach Tel HaShomer. He got there. They took him straight into surgery, and they did an emergency surgery and saved his life. But in the meantime, we had no idea where he was and what was going on. We were able to get Hazel a flight from New York.
Really not knowing anything other than he was stable, I wasn't really prepared for what I was going to meet. And once I landed, my kids took me straight to the ICU, and I see Yona in the corner room, and thankfully Yona's wounds were all in his lower body. He did have one bullet lodged in his head between his skin and his skull, and there was a little bump here of a bullet just sitting there. After a very, very serious amputation of his right leg, the doctors came in. He had already had his left leg amputated, and so people were worried. Doctors were worried. How is he going to take this psychologically? What's going to happen? How do they break the news to him? And so after the emergency surgery and the amputation, we're back in the room, and they wake Yona up, and it's a slow process, a lot of sedation, a lot of drugs that take a while to kind of wake up from. He wakes up, and they begin to tell him what happened, that his artery had burst, and this is the amputation they had to do for him. And there was silence, kind of didn't know what to do, how he was going to react, and they had brought in a psychologist and a social worker because anybody's situation was just horrific news, and they didn't know how he was going to respond. And Yona looks at us, and he says, "What time is it?" I'm like, "Why is he asking what time it is?" And so we look at the clock, and it was about 4 o'clock that time. As I said, it's 4 o'clock, and he said, "When is Shkia? When does the sun set?" So we said, "Sunset later," and he said, "Bring me my tefillin." And I think this really symbolizes Yona. Yona did not get caught up in what his body was going to look like, what his injury was. It was all about living life. It was about moving forward and doing anything he had in his power at that moment to get to rehab. Rehab was Yona's dream. Unfortunately, Yona didn't make it there. He didn't really have a lot of options, and his one option was to take his tefillin and to talk to God. And that's what he did. For us, I think that's really symbolic of how we're learning to deal with pain and suffering and adversity and huge loss. At the end of August, actually, Yona was really doing quite well. The ICU team decided to take him out of ICU and put him into the burn unit. And it was a really good week. He wasn't attached to all sorts of tubes. We had a lot of friends that visited him, and he was just doing great.
We expected him to come out of it. We had seen so many miracles, so many things the doctors didn't think was possible. We were convinced that he was just going to pull through. Unfortunately, they took a turn for a worse in that 14th month.
Saturday night, he called about 1 a.m. We were at that point for the year actually living in the hospital. And Yona said, he's in a lot of pain, please come. And that started a whole issue with his stomach and his liver, of which really was sort of the beginning of, unfortunately, the end for Yona. We understood by Monday things were very, very serious. At that point, we already called in his friends and all the kids were in. And on Tuesday morning at 6:29, same time the war started, in 2023 on October 7th, Yona took his last breath. He was surrounded by his family, his friends, his doctors, the nurses. He was not alone. We're all very proud of the fight that he made. Yona was on the list of soldiers that were killed. I very deeply believe that was God's plan on October 7th, but he decided to give Yona a chance to see what he could do. And Yona gifted us. He gifted our family and all of us with 417 days of memories, of inspiration, of love of Israel, love of the Jewish people, love of life, of deep faith in God. We miss him dearly. We long for him. We're very sad, but we are very, very aware of the gift of 417 days that Yona gave us.
It's been quite a difficult period, and we're getting through it, and we're looking ahead. And we have Yona rooting us on.
It's a tragedy, but there's also Yona gave us so many reasons to be proud, to be alive, to be a soldier, to be a human being. I think what I'd also say as a mom, hug all your children. They're all precious, each and every one of them, and not every child is exactly the way you want your child to be. Actually, none of them are. They're their own people, and they should be that way. But hug all your children. They're all precious souls.
What's important is that we feel that he didn't die in vain. Not only his memory, but his message goes on. And what we saw with Yona, unfortunately, is that everything was taken away from him. And if there's one thing that I want everybody to know about Yona, even though he lost things, he was still very thankful. And he's still, it's important for me to say this, just there's so many things we take for granted. And we saw that Yona, even though everything was taken away from him, he was still thankful that he was able to wake up every morning and say, Modeh Ani, and put on his tefillin and to daven and to feel close to God. And that's where he is today.